questions this week. The first one, I need help explaining to people how the free market is being wrongly blamed for the state of our economy. So, Judge and Peter, how about if each of you gives us your best quick talking point in defense of the free market?
Peter, how did the free market, rather than the government, or how did the government, rather than the free market, get us into the mess we're in today? In 2 minutes or less.
The government did it. I mean, obviously, there were people in the private sector that were influenced by government policy, but it's the government policy that's at fault. See, our policy of keeping interest rates low and, of course, keeping our tax and regulations high, we created an inefficient economy where we really couldn't afford to manufacture because we weren't competitive. But the one thing we can afford to do was consume because we kept our interest rates so low so that we can borrow. And our dollar was artificially high based on intervention by foreign central banks. But what happened was you had the Fed keeping rates much too low. You had government agencies which were interfering with the market, which created moral hazards, which encouraged people to take excessive risks. And so we had all this rampant speculation in the real estate market. We had Americans buying things they couldn't afford, buying cars they couldn't afford, sending their kids to overpriced universities, buying all sorts of imported consumer goods. Everything was on credit. And then the bubble blew up because we borrowed too much money and our asset prices were phony. They were based on inflated real estate prices or inflated stock prices. And this whole the whole thing came crashing down, and it left us mired in debt with an industrial base that's basically been hollowed out, and our economy can't function. But none of this would have happened had we had a free market, had the government not artificially set interest rates low, had we not had all these government agencies that were encouraging and subsidizing excessive risk-taking. The market would have regulated itself. People would have been afraid to take risks because they would have been afraid of losses. We would have had, bigger down payments for real estate. People would not have bought homes that they couldn't afford. We would have a much more stable economy.
I fully agree with everything Peter said. In my own answer to the question, Shelley, I go back to first principles, which is the Constitution, the purpose of which was to restrain the government and to keep it from doing things that the framers didn't want it to do, like violate our natural rights, like violate the laws of physics and violate the laws of economics. So when the government started with things like Fannie and Freddie and then encouraged bankers to give mortgages to people who would never be able to pay them back because don't worry, you can sell any mortgage you want to Fannie and Freddie.
And look what they're doing now, Judge, with the FHA. A year or two ago, FHA mortgages were something like 3% of the mortgages. Now better than a third of the mortgages are FHA. Why? Because FHA is 3% down. And now they're trying to make it so you can use your $8,000 tax credit to make that 3% down payment, which means now the government is enabling and guaranteeing zero down mortgages.
Well, look, under George Bush, and one of the things I was going to point to about government behavior is under George Bush, HUD offered mortgages with 0% down. The federal government used your tax dollars to give mortgages to over 150,000 homeowners with zero down. There are court opinions saying that when there's zero down, it's not a mortgage. It's the functional equivalent of rental. We also had the Carter-era statute of the Community Reinvestment Act, which forced banks to invest money in areas where they ordinarily would not go, where they would not get the return that they want. If bankers were at fault, it's because bankers were encouraged, facilitated, and practically forced to do this stuff by the government.
It's completely asinine.
Hold on, Peter. What other questions do you have?
I mean, when someone has zero down, that's like loaning somebody money and having no collateral. I mean, that's banking 101. I mean, where's the incentive to pay back the loan if there's no collateral? I mean, you go anywhere, even a pawn shop, everybody wants collateral for a loan. But here we had a culture where we'd say we'd let people make a huge purchase, a massive purchase, like a house, with absolutely no collateral whatsoever. I mean, it's crazy.
Shelley, what else do you have for us?
Here's another question for Peter from Richard Spencer. Last fall, the Fed acquired the ability to issue bonds. Bernanke said that if inflation ever got going, he could soak up the excess liquidity with these bonds. Problem solved, right?
Peter?
What did you say? I couldn't hear the whole...
Oh, all right. Say it again, Shelley, with a little bit of a technical
Why don't you repeat it to me? It's hard for me to hear what she said.
Go ahead, Shelley. Oh, okay. Last fall, the Fed acquired the ability to issue bonds. Bernanke said that if inflation ever got going, he could soak up the excess liquidity with these bonds. What do you think about that?
Last fall, Bernanke said that if inflation comes about, he can soak up, I don't know how he could even say this, excess liquidity with bonds. Does any of this make sense to you, Peter?
No, look, the whole thing is, that's like saying, so a smoker says, well, if I get cancer, I'll stop smoking. I mean, it's not going to do any good. And there's no way they're going to soak up that liquidity. You can't soak it up. I mean, it's first of all, it's the Pacific Ocean of liquidity. There's not a sponge big enough to soak it up. But the whole idea that he's going to get us real, addicted to even cheaper money than we have now, and then the minute that prices start to rise, he's going to, pull the rug out from under everybody's feet. He's just going to jack interest rates up when he's got everybody overextended. I mean, think about this. Look at all the money the U.S. government is borrowing right now for the stimulus, and it's all short-term money. Is Ben Bernanke really going to jack up interest rates and force the U.S. government to have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars extra?
Peter, it's not the U.S. government, it's the U.S. taxpayer. Shelley, any last question or any last comment from you about what we've been talking about in the past hour?
Well, here's another question that I think is kind of interesting. What do you guys think about the media trying to say we're coming out of this economic downturn despite all the indications to the contrary?
Peter, what do you think about the media trying to whip up the idea that we're coming out of the economic downturn, notwithstanding all the indications to the contrary?
Well, look, what do you expect from the media? They don't even understand what's going on. So when they see numbers that said Americans went back to the malls and bought more stuff, they interpret that as meaning, oh, we're coming out of it. We're not coming out of anything. The more we spend, the bigger the hole that we dig for ourselves. All of this is just making the problem worse. We can't solve this crisis by borrowing and spending more money. That's impossible. So we're not going to be coming out of this crisis until we're doing the opposite of that, until we're paying back the money we borrowed, until Americans are really replenishing their savings. And that's not just Americans, but the government. The government has to cut spending. The deficits have to shrink. As long as the deficits are growing, this economic crisis is going to get worse because the government isn't stimulating the economy. They're suffocating the economy. They're destroying the economy. The only stimulus that will work is less government.
Peter, you got the last word. Peter, Schiff, Shelley Roche, thank you very much. To all of my friends at Freedom Watch, until next Wednesday, stay free.